Welcome to the Faith is Not Blind podcast. I'm Sarah Devonier, and I'm here with Al Carraway. You may you may know her as Al Fox. Sometimes she's referred to as the Tattooed Mormon. You may have heard of her that way. She's written a few different books to share her story. Today, what we want to focus on in her story is the transformative power of faith and how faith not only transforms us, but faith transforms over time, and it evolves and it grows along with us. So welcome to our...
Hi, thank you.
Will you just talk a little bit about in Greek dramas they start in medias res, which is sort of in the middle of things, and so that's how we're going to start. A lot of people, I think, know your basic story. And I had the privilege of reading the book and thinking about it, the book about your conversion.
Oh, yeah.
Will you just talk about, so you grew up in New York, never really having known anything about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And then after you met the missionaries and started talking to them, once you realized that you were going to be baptized and go into this unknown territory. Will you describe kind of what that felt like?
Well, my quest is to prove the missionaries wrong, because I thought like religion and God, I thought that was all in people's heads, and people only turn to it if something was going wrong in their life. And I'm like, I'm 21. I feel like this is the best life is ever going to get. And I was like loving what I was doing. I was loving who I was. And I met these missionaries. I'm like, sorry, boys, everything you believe in, like, it's all in your head. And so my quest is to prove them wrong. And so I lived to the best that I could, exactly how they were teaching me, and live it long enough to allow contrast to happen if it were to happen, and then go back to them and be like, told you so. And so I tried, and it was awkward. Everything about my efforts into learning or doing was uncomfortable and awkward and like worst God has ever seen kind of efforts, right? And then I decided, joke's on me. I decided to get baptized. That rocked my world. But I figured, oh my gosh, if life was this good for me before having the most powerful being to ever exist on my side, like, and I could like talk directly to him, like, oh my gosh, life is going to be incredible. And so I got baptized, and it wasn't until then that my life fell apart, like shattered in every way that you can think of. It was instant and then lasting. And you just have to figure out, well, so what does this mean? And so now what?
Well, and that sort of seems to be the opposite of what most people expect faith to be.
Yeah.
That faith is going to be this lighted path, and you just follow it, and you get
why
to
is
this
this
amazing
happening? I'm
place.
doing what I should be, or why is this happening? I thought God loved me.
Yeah. So with all of these things happening, this expectation failure, and then you moved to Utah, and it seems like it just got worse.
Even worse. Yeah, I didn't want to move to Utah. That wasn't my idea. It was this reoccurring thought. I feel like that's how the Spirit speaks to me. It's just a reoccurring thought. And so I'm like, okay, I guess I'll listen to it. And I was so miserable about the whole idea. I hated it, but it's not up to me. I was going to give God a chance. And so I went. And even though I didn't want to do it, I saw it as like my glimmer of hope, because everything fell apart with my family, with my friends, with my life in New York after baptism. I thought, well, since this is God's idea, this is where things are going to start to come together, and things are going to start to make sense and become a little bit easier. And so I was a little excited for that to happen, and I got there and I found out that things just got so much worse.
Yeah.
The way that I was treated, everything. And so then you have another moment and you're like, wait, what does this mean? Now what?
Well, I like how you use the phrase, give God a chance. What made you want to give him a chance? I mean, because the evidence had shown things get worse when I follow God.
Yeah.
So what made you want to give him a chance?
Contrast. If I grew up in the church, there's no way I'd be in it. There's no way.
Because you needed the contrast.
Because when things got really hard and crappy pretty quickly, I was able to be like, wait a second. I went 21 years of my life not having this. And when I got the gift of the Holy Ghost, that was a physical difference. It was a literal difference. Like I felt it. And I mean, no matter how crafty those doubts and questions can be, and no matter how real and heavy they are, I kept going back to, wait, that's 21 years of my life, and I never felt that.
Okay.
I never saw that before. And so I decided to trust it. And the time frame of time that's passing between getting baptized and going to Utah is a pretty hefty time frame to trust him. Because you feel like, well, something should have happened by now. You feel like I've been faithful for long enough, and I've been working towards this with so many different efforts for long enough that something should have happened by now. But I decided, I just kept going back like, wait, no, I've never felt that before. And I only felt it when I'm trying. And I've only felt it in my awkward, worst God has ever seen kind of efforts into reaching out to him and to do the right thing. And so I held on to that for dear life. And I figured there's got to be a different way to see this. Yeah. I figured there's no way I know everything. And even now, oh my gosh, I mean, I got baptized 10 years ago.
Has it been 10 years?
This year was 10 years. And I've gone through things 100 times harder than what I wrote about in my first book. Like, I'm so much more than just that conversion story. Like, things like are so much worse since then.
Well, and let's talk about that, because I think some people might see your conversion story and be like, okay, Al Carraway, she just, glides off into the sunset. But how?
And that's where my new book comes in.
Yeah. And when you talk about that faith, I think what you're implying is there were transitions in your faith. There was growth in your faith.
Yeah.
Can you give an example of something sort of in the middle of that time where you realized that your faith was not going to stay the same?
Well, it shouldn't stay the same. So when I moved to Utah, I really had like this pivotal, like, you got to figure it out. And I'm a very stubborn New York girl. So I feel like if I make a decision on something, I'm like driven, which is kind of good in these cases.
Yeah, I can see that.
I moved to Utah, was treated terribly. And in New York, and being the only member of your church at the time, like, they are literal family for you. Yeah. I don't know
the other members.
No
of the
one
church.
else can like understand that, but it is a literal family. And I get to New York or get to Utah, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'll never be alone. I could go to the grocery store family, and like everyone there is like, you know what I mean? They know what I know.
Everyone's family.
I mean, we have the answers to the questions of the universe. Like, that seems dramatic, but that is true. I mean, you go to New York and people sometimes go, anywhere in the world, they go their whole lives and sometimes never finding these answers of, well, what does all this mean? You know what I mean? Like, do I have a purpose?
How did you make sure your faith kept evolving? Like in the middle, like 5 years after your baptism, because you start out a marathon, right? And then what happens when you get in the middle of the marathon to keep going and realize, like you said, faith isn't supposed to stay the same. How did your faith not stay the same?
I couldn't worry about anyone else. Like I said, so what I was trying to get to is in Utah, and I was treated this way by people who were supposed to be there and people who I thought we were all in it together. They were the worst ones, I think. And I had to realize, well, it's not about them. And whatever people say or do, or that nasty look they gave me, whatever, or that email from that church leader or, local church leader or whatever, like, if I'm going to let that stop me and my efforts, like, who is that hurting? Mm-hmm. Yeah. My soul. Because what I found out 10 years ago is, like, my soul, like, that's real. It's alive. And God, like, he's real. And I'm not going to let that nasty comment from someone I'll never see again, or from that church leader who, who cares, stop me from my forever. Like, why would I do that? Like, I don't care enough about you to do that to myself. And so I'm like, I'm just going to go for it, because if it's true that we have the most powerful, all-knowing being to ever exist on our side, I have to give him the opportunity to show us how great he really is. And that I can't do that doing things my way. And I can't do that trying to figure things out in my own brain that knows nothing in retrospect, And we just have to give God the opportunity to be God. We need to take the unexpected and the unwanted and the uncharted paths and give him the opportunity to lead us to what I know are the better things. And maybe that road really sucks. And maybe that road is really long. But you will have these moments. And sometimes, I didn't hear from my dad for 4 years. Maybe it's even longer than that. Some things I go through or are unsolved has been much longer than those 4 years. But then we will have these moments where we stop and we look around and we'll be so grateful for where we are. And we'll be so grateful for what we have and what we've gained along the way. And wouldn't want to change a thing. And I live for those moments. And so sometimes things really suck. Yeah. And sometimes things don't make sense. And sometimes, too much time is passing and it's not quite what we wanted. But we'll have these moments where we'll be so grateful that we trusted the one person that we can trust to bring us higher and to bring us to those better things. To be like, yeah, that's what matters. He matters because he really is real, because look what happened.
Yeah. When you have those moments where you're sort of above the fray and you feel like, yeah, I can see this. I can see that my faith is growing. How would you counsel people who are not in that moment, who are in the middle of one of those moments where they don't know why they're on the path and they don't know how to keep going?
This is the face of someone who still doesn't know why they're where they are right now.
But what keeps you going? I like that. Sometimes we don't know the why, but what keeps you going?
Guess what? So is everyone else. Like, first of all, you're not alone. The idea that anyone thinks they're alone in their feelings, like, that's the most ludicrous thing we could ever think. The whole idea of that is why I started writing 8 years ago to begin with, is even though we all experience different things, we all feel the same. Like, I lose my voice at God so often because I'm screaming at him. I mean, just the other day I was crying, yelling at him. And I mean, how many times I questioned, like, well, does this even matter? Like, are my efforts and my hopes, are they in vain? Like, I mean, people read my first book and that's so great, but like, it's ongoing. And so I still lose my voice and I still wonder and I still have these doubts and these questions. But if we are productive in them, that is when things happen.
Yeah.
I mean, I can complain all the time to my husband or to God or to anyone else why things suck and why things don't make sense and why things are a certain way, even just the other day. But if we're not doing anything, if we're not looking for new things that are there and that are upcoming, or, then whose fault is it?
Yeah, so it needs so productive. I mean, President Kimball, he talked about how we should totally, consistently, and continuously repent. And I wonder if that applies to our faith too. Totally, consistently, and continuously work on your faith. Make sure you have productive faith. So right now, first of all, how is your faith different than it was 10 years when you got baptized? How would you describe the evolution of productive faith over 10 years?
I have things now. Before, I had to just trust these church pamphlets. And I'd be like, okay, well, prove it. But now when I'm yelling at him and I'm wondering where he is and if he even still cares, like, about me, I mean, no matter how real the adversary and how crafty and subtle the adversary is, because questions are good. Trying to look at things in a new way, it's good. But when they stop you from moving and from being productive, that is the adversary taking advantage of you. So we have to make sure we are being productive. Is there a new way to see this? Is there a different way that I can view this? Is there something that I'm missing? Or am I just sitting still with all of this? Because sometimes the adversary gets us best by not doing anything. Are you doing anything with your questions? Like, are you talking to someone, especially God? An inventory of your efforts is good. And sometimes I'm like, actually, I'm not doing what I should. I'm not doing those little things. And sometimes we're doing all that we can that we feel like something should have happened by now. And that's when those are almost kind of like my favorite moments, is when you feel like you give it all and you feel like nothing's happening and he's gone silent. Because I've learned that even though things are not changing, even though things are sitting still or quiet, doesn't mean that God is. And I feel like in those moments, in like those transition moments, something intricate is happening. And so I like to look for the lessons, and I like to look for, like, I wanted to go on a mission. That's all I wanted to do was serve a mission. And I pleaded with God, like, surely, like, that's a righteous, good thing to want to do. Like, why would he deny that? And it didn't. And it took me a really long time, years even, to be like, I was praying for this one thing and it never happened. I never served a mission. But to look back and be like, wait, look at what I'm doing. Look what else came, that something different came to be able to do it in a different capacity, in a different way that I actually love so much more, that has led to an even greater life. And so sometimes we pray for this one thing that we don't see everything else that's happening to lead us to something you will love so much more, because he's smarter than we are and he knows us better and he's got greater things than we even knew were available. And so I like when things don't go my way because it's almost like, what next is going to happen? Because if I'm being honest, like, all of those times I was screaming, wondering where he was and why things were so hard and if he cares about me. Every single time I was yelling at him, it was all of those moments that has brought me to everything I have now.
So your experience has taught you to expect change.
Oh my gosh,
and
my
to
favorite
expect
things,
the unexpected.
Yes, my favorite things have come from the unwanted and the unexpected and the uncharted. All of them. 100% of the things I'm doing now and that I have now and that I love so much that I wouldn't know what I'd do without came from those times I was screaming at him.
And do you think it's that recognition that has helped you not to just not hate those moments, but to actually value them?
Yeah, that's how I'm like, you do it enough, then you start to get excited about it. Not that it's any less hard, but you're like, what's he doing now?
Well, and I like how you said there were these intricacies going on.
Oh yeah.
And so how do you find the patience to say, okay, maybe I can't see what's going on. Okay, so there's major construction going on to my soul and to my faith, but maybe a lot of it is in a place that I cannot see.
Yeah.
Then how do you keep going then?
Well, don't sit still. Like, do other things. Like, what are you doing? Like, you're here once. Like, are you just going to wrap your whole self up in this one thing? Or are you going to go out there and move? And, like, once you're in movement and in action in any way, like, you're easily able for him to place you and move you into those different things and you know, get there a little quicker. But nothing's going to happen if you do nothing.
Yeah. I've noticed, too, as you're talking, that your relationship with God is very personal.
Oh, I love him.
That there are these ups and downs. You scream at him.
Yeah.
You praise him.
How else I think that came from, I didn't grow up in like a culture. I didn't grow up hearing these said phrases like, I will never say nourish and strengthen. Like, oh my gosh, please, like, help me to not overeat. Like, please make sure I'm not eating more than I should be because I need help with that. And like, Like,
So you're
why aren't you
specific.
asking him? And why aren't you saying things that you're feeling? Because, like, well, I wouldn't do that with you or any other friend. But I think not having been taught a certain way, I was able to experiment and explore and just have things how they are now. I don't
Yeah.
know.
So if someone was raised in the culture and they sort of said, okay, I think faith is
I
supposed to
don't think, I
be a
think,
certain way, how did they get out of that?
I don't know. Well, just say what you're saying. If you want to say this sucks, like, we'll tell him because specific prayers receive specific answers. And if I'm telling him this doesn't make sense and I don't like this, well, then I'm being productive.
Well, and
New thoughts come.
yeah, I think sometimes people who are raised in the church expect faith to be like this museum when actually it's this amusement park and it's
No.
constantly fluctuating and constantly moving forward. If someone has a faith like that, how do you think that they can break free of that?
Say what you want to say. If something's bugging you, if something doesn't make sense, if you want something, tell him.
And what
Like,
about,
it's freeing. And then that's how you're like, he's real.
yeah.
He's real to me because I said this and this happened and I was honest and I opened up and now he opened up more. I don't know. The prayers that, yeah, man, I don't. I mean, you just picture him standing right in front of you.
Yeah. I love the way you describe your relationship with him. It seems very dynamic. Um, I want to talk about, though, I think maybe sometimes people have an easier time talking to God and being real with God. But how about within the church culture? How, if we have people who want to talk to church leaders or their friends about these doubts
Yeah.
and say, I have these questions, this is not what I expected. My faith is stretching. How can we as members welcome that more so that we can help people's faith transform?
Um, well, great question. I think that's going to be different per leader you have. I'm sure
Yeah.
people are watching this like, oh, that's great. You know, we're told to talk to bishops, but my bishop is the problem. And then you're like, well, so now what?
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to get to a point where you just have to worry about you
Yeah.
and worry about God and not worry about all of these people, no matter what they're doing or who they are. But then on the other side of this, like, those leaders are there for us.
Yeah, at least ideally.
And I think if we sit on the other end of listening to someone who's struggling and wondering or exploring and experimenting, which I think everyone should do,
Yeah.
I think we get in fix-it mode instead of any other mode. We're like, oh, you have a problem. I'm going to fix it. Let me fix it. Let me tell you things or tell you what we believe in or tell you this doctrine or tell you this so you don't have to worry about it anymore. It's not your problem. And I think fix-it mode it just doesn't rub right.
Well, it makes people feel like they're actually an outcast
Right.
rather than the part of the family that you hoped that you would find when you were converted.
Yeah, don't get in fix-it mode. I think that's just a natural. I don't even think we know that we're doing it. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, if you have people come to you and say, I have this concern, what do you do rather than fix it mode? What's a better
You
mode?
listen. I think the one thing is people just want to know. I think the whole reason why people started reading anything I wrote is because they had this comfort and almost open gate of, it's not just me.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people feel. And so when we get in fix-it mode, people are like, oh, it's not right that I feel this because you feel like you need to.
Yeah, and that's an implication. No one's saying I want to fix you, but they're making them feel as if they need to be fixed.
It's like, oh, you have the answer. Oh, you're okay with that? Then, something must be wrong or this isn't okay or I don't like that. Because it does, I don't know, no one likes that. Yeah.
So you just listen.
Oh, yeah.
And how, if people's friends have questions, if they're thinking, I'm really uncomfortable with different doctrines, or I found out something, how do you treat that?
So, like my new book, if I'm thinking of, my publishers are like, how about a new book? I'm like, can my brain do that right now? If I were to write something, what is important? And so I wrote down in bullet point everything I knew I would want to talk about. It ended up being like 8 pages of bullet points, and I put all the paper, and I'm like, okay, is there a book here? Is there a theme among all of these bullet points? And I realized, like, oh, every chapter in my new book, wildly optimistic. It's gaining new perspective for life's challenges. Every chapter is a theme within a trial. Anything I've ever struggled with or asked myself is a chapter. When it's not what we wanted, when too much time passes, when it's hard to trust him, when, is God always good? And those are my chapters because I believe I never want to give someone an answer, but to explore what else. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the whole point of all of this is there's not one answer, or you're never really done and you're not done evolving or changing because there's always something, what else with God. So when the times we feel like he is silent, mm-hmm. the times where we're not getting that one thing we're praying for and we start to wonder if he even cares about us or if he's even listening or if he's even there at all. Well, what else in those times? And so are there things to question and do differently and look at things differently? And so I like to pose those questions of like, yeah, I felt that. Yeah, that sucks. Like validate them. But then like, can we position them to be like, what else?
Yeah.
How can we see God in this? Because I believe after 21 years of not having him, I know for a fact, even in those quiet, silent times, he's always there. And so what else?
Yeah, which is such a contrast to what you were saying before. If people just stop, they stop moving, they sit down, they refuse to move, that's just saying, okay, I'm stopped. Mm-hmm. But that question,
or I'm stuck.
What else? Well, and not only what else could happen, what else could this mean? Yeah. What else could this say about God? What are other options, which ends up being expansive rather than reductive?
Yeah.
Which I think you're saying faith is expansive. Mm-hmm. It's eternal. It's not one little thing in a box.
No, it's not. And I think like that's what I've learned is like all of the things that I've learned about God are this way and they fit within this realm. And then we feel like, well, God has spoken to me before and I felt the Spirit before at some point. And so that's how it happens for me in this box, that anything different or outside of that box or whatever we think we know already almost sometimes makes things worse for me. I feel like I know how he talks, or I feel like I know him enough and how he works for me that anything else I dismiss or not even notice. And so I think, well, if he's not answering me, maybe I'm learning new adjectives about God that I didn't know before. And so if things aren't happening in the way that I've learned or have been taught, maybe God is more vast than we know. And maybe we're limiting him without even realizing that we are because of this unconscious box we've put around ourselves or what we learn or what other people have experienced. Like, oh, God did that for you. Well, he hasn't done that for me or come to me in that way, so he must just not come to me. But I think God is limitless and he's more vast than we can comprehend. And so learning more adjectives can be a thrill rather than this racking, paralyzing trial where we doubt and question his existence. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Let me just ask you one last question. Where you sit now, you have 3 beautiful kids.
Oh, yeah.
And you have this...
I just had a baby.
You did. And so I can't believe you're here. But how would you describe your faith right now in your life, in this season? What does faith look like?
My season that I'm in now is a change of course season. I can plan all I want, and that's cute and all. But right now, God is in my redirecting phase. And so now, just this past week, I've thrown my arms in the air and be like, okay, what next? And I don't know what the answer is. But I tend to pay attention to my reoccurring thoughts. If something new and different, maybe even unwanted, but if it keeps coming back, we have to pay attention to that. I feel almost as if it's like my soul trying to bring me somewhere that it knows more than I do. And so right now, I'm listening to my reoccurring thoughts, and I don't really like some of those ideas that are coming to my mind. And counseling with Ben, he's a great resource to have. My spouses are good. I feel like God uses them most to help answer your prayers. Pay attention to your reoccurring thoughts, because I feel like that's your soul bringing you down those paths to that something better, even though right now it's not what I wanted, but we'll see.
Yeah, well, and you will see, because you're willing to look and you're willing to pay attention and know that it's somehow out there, whatever it looks like.
Yeah, I think of Joseph in the Old Testament, and he had his coat from his parents. And I mean, the coat of many colors, and he had a great life. And, he was promised great things in his life. He had everything just going so well for him. And he had every right to be excited for however his life was going to unfold. And I feel like that's how we are, especially growing up in the church, or especially having these church leaders where we hear so often about these blessings that we're going to get and what's coming and what's promised to us. And then he goes in a hole, Joseph. And sometimes we feel like, wait, I was promised a good life, but now I'm in this hole. And then what happens to Joseph? Well, he's sold as a slave. So he went from bad to worse.
Yeah.
And sometimes we feel like, oh my gosh, things suck. And then something else happens and you're like, wait. Like me moving to Utah, wait. It wasn't supposed to get worse. Things were already bad. And then what happens to Joseph? Well, what happens? He goes in prison and then he's a slave. Like, he goes from bad to worse to even worse. And I like to think of Joseph as like my model when things go from bad, my hole to slave to prison moments where we feel like things keep getting worse, especially, how much time had passed for him.
Yeah.
His whole life. And so we have these moments where we're like, we were promised so much and I'm in a hole. Or things got worse and now I'm a slave. Or things got worse and I'm in my prison moments. And, he was promised to be a great leader. Is he going to be a leader in that hole? Is he a leader when he's in prison? But through those times and those unwanted times and those passing times, that he didn't just become a leader over his family, and he didn't just become a leader over his little area of land where he lived. He became a leader over all of Egypt. And how much he had, and I think we see our whole moments and our prison moments and our slave moments and the passing time where we're like, this isn't what I promised. And instead of questioning and wondering, we see it through and we get even more than we thought was possible, because those promises are real, because God is real. And with passing time doesn't dim those promises. Maybe our efforts do, but not God.
Yeah. And you have what a beautiful example of Joseph not only allowing God to have more adjectives, as you said, but he's allowing Joseph to have more adjectives.
Yeah.
Joseph is expanding as his faith is expanding and as his vision of God is expanding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The woman with the blood disease, she went her whole life giving everything she had. Every effort, every resource, every financial thing that she had, and nothing has happened. And sometimes we invest so much and we have nothing to show for our efforts. And I can't imagine her thinking that, well, maybe I'm the exception. And we think of Christ and his apostles walking down the busy street. And I mean, those streets, it's like salmon. It's like you're shoulder to shoulder crowd anywhere you're going. And so Christ, he's in this shoulder to shoulder crowd, and he stops and he's like, well, who touched me? And the apostles I would probably laugh if I were them. I'm like, are you joking? Like, everyone is touching you. Like, is that a joke? Like, that's the dumbest question I've ever heard. Sorry. And he stopped and he said, who touched me? In this shoulder to shoulder crowd. And so sometimes we feel like we're the relief or the exception to these blessings and these promises, and we're spent in our efforts. But I know that if we stay there, and any little bit of energy that we have to reach out to try and touch him, he will stop for us. He will notice us, and he will get on his knees on the ground for us and help us, regardless of that passing time, if we just push ourselves to make that effort, because we are blessed for any effort, no matter how small or tiny or worse God has ever seen kind of effort. We are always blessed for those.
Thank you so much for sharing your faith. I don't know if you can appreciate how many people appreciate you and the way that you've developed yourself, and the example of continuing faith and evolving faith. So thank you for pushing forward, and thank you for continuing to nurture your faith. Thank you.
Well, thanks
so much.
Thanks.